Buongiorno, sono Silvia Arcari, Euroconsulting. Noi abbiamo accettato con piacere di organizzare questo seminario finale formativo organizzato dalla Regione Campania, in quanto lo scorso anno noi avevamo una collaborazione attiva che prevedeva una serie di seminari formativi e di coaching per alcune attività in materia di politiche UE sugli aiuti di Stato. A questo proposito, già conoscendo la dottoressa Lenka Blehova, le abbiamo chiesto la disponibilità a essere il nostro relatore, il nostro referente in questo seminario, in quanto la dottoressa Blehova fa parte della DG Concorrenza della Commissione Europea e ha partecipato attivamente anche alla definizione dei nuovi testi e ha una lunghissima esperienza in aiuti di Stato in agricoltura. Quindi dopo questa piccola introduzione che io ho fatto, passerei la parola alla dottoressa Passari, al vertice della DG, Direzione Generale delle Politiche Agricole, Alimentari e Forestali della Regione Campania, che penso abbia qualcosa da dirvi. Prego, dottoressa Passari.
Ma sicuramente un ringraziamento da Euroconsulting per avere costruito questo momento di confronto diretto con la DG Concorrenza, anche perché credo di interpretare il sentimento comune dei rappresentanti delle regioni che sono presenti e dei miei colleghi della Regione Campania. Stiamo vivendo con la costruzione di questo New Delivery Model nei nostri programmi un momento di davvero grande complessità e quindi momenti di confronto diretto ci aiutano sicuramente a chiarire una serie di dubbi che abbiamo, ma sulla cooperazione, sull'ACHIS e su altre situazioni particolari del PSP. Per cui quello che probabilmente sarebbe necessario, ma questo poi sarà l'occasione di una futura interlocuzione con Euroconsulting, riuscire comunque ad avere un accompagnamento rispetto a queste tematiche particolarmente complesse. Anche perché con lo stesso Ministero, insomma, e lo sappiamo, il Ministero si trova anch'esso a gestire, dopo 23 anni di gestione concorrente, in cui le regioni sono state protagoniste di un rapporto e di una negoziazione diretta con la Commissione, anche grande confusione, la necessità di coordinare insomma, un numero elevato di regioni. Insomma, come regioni abbiamo una serie di difficoltà ad andare avanti e quindi ritengo che anche utilizzando questi momenti che ciascuna regione può costruire e mettere a disposizione di tutti, possano servire per affrontare quest'anno, che è un anno di grande passaggio, insomma, nonostante ci sia un 14-22 complicato ancora da chiudere, ma la costruzione del nostro CSR e del PSP sembra veramente un terreno minato, insomma, in cui quotidianamente dobbiamo cercare di superare gli ostacoli e risolvere i problemi. Io non direi nient'altro, solo buon lavoro a tutti. Ringrazio sicuramente le regioni che hanno aderito all'invito che avevamo fatto, ma anche questo è sintomo della necessità di avere dei momenti diretti di confronto. Ringrazio Euroconsulting, insomma, ci abbiamo messo un po' a concludere questo percorso, ma alla fine spero che sia il momento più importante, insomma, al di là della consulenza diretta che ci avete fornito. E in molti casi credo che con questo seminario si chiuda anche un rapporto costruttivo probabilmente da ripetere.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I've seen the list of the participants. I'm glad to see that it's from across the Italian regions. I understand that the main purpose here is to present the new rules, which was basically the main agenda for me and my colleagues for the last 2 years, in year 2021 and 2022. Now here we are, we've been implementing it, and also obviously catching the toothing diseases. So there will be some corrections that I can already say. So if you are aware of any errors, if you spotted any errors in the text of any of the two instruments, please let us know. We, as I said, we are preparing the correction. I can answer also your questions outside the mayor new rules, so don't hesitate to ask. I will now try to share my screen with the presentation. So basically, I suppose that you read the, and judging by also your questions, which I already received, I suppose that you all are involved in the state aid matters, that you read the instrument. So here I will go straight away to the background of what happened and how the things happened. As you now know, both revised instruments, when we talk about two revised instruments, these are the guidelines and the block exemption regulations. Here I put the OG numbers, but I suppose this is just for information that's well known to you. They both entered into force on 1st January this year. At the same time, it was accompanied by the impact assessment, a huge document in which we really assessed all the changes that we proposed. The revision was preceded by the evaluation. It was also a very long process and big report, which basically evaluated the previous rules and assessed the need for possible change. Very important drivers was then, so basically this evaluation, which was basically very much based on at that time, the case practice, on the comments or questions which we received from the member states, was that repeated. We just understood that this need our look to do something about it. Very, very important element was the revision of the CIP framework. Then obviously we have the Green Deal, and the green and environmental and climatic objectives are on the top of the agenda of the Commission. So this must obviously be reflected in the stated as well. And last but not least, it was the judgment of the court in so-called Hinkley Point C judgment. The point C case, which basically is very important for the interpretation of Article 1073C, which is the legal basis for most of the state aid decisions. As you may see in the decisions, the reference to that legal basis. So here I can give you more information about the key drivers of the process. As I said, one of the most important was the revision of the CAP. You know that the overall design of the CAP changed very much. We moved from the detailed conditions to subsidiarity model to delivery model, where basically the legislation is much less prescriptive. We have much less conditions. It is for the member states to design and tailor their strategic plans and measures included in there according to their needs. Now it was obviously necessary for the state aid to take that into account and to adapt, because as you know, the state aid for agriculture and partially for forestry is really embedded in the larger context of the CAP. The previous rural development regulation, as I said, was very detailed, and basically our rules were copy-paste of that, because it is the stated principle that the effects of granting money doesn't change or is independent of whether it's coming from the EU budget for the co-finance measures or it's a pure state aid. So basically the effects on the competition and trade on the internal market are the same. And that is why we pursue also the objective of consistency between the two policies, the CAP and the competition policy. Then very important was also the fact that at the same time the revision of other stated. Anything for me? No. Okay. Also, can I continue? There was a lot of sound.
Direi di sì, non so se i tecnici stanno...
Okay, then I continue and we'll see. So at the same time, other stated instruments were revised as well. There was a big revision in the fishery field, the general block exemption regulation, regional aid guidelines, environmental and energy aid guidelines, also research framework. All this was reviewed as well, and there are many issues that are cross-cutting. So basically, there is no reason for parallel rules, and we are consistent with these instruments as much as possible. So there is a consistency with the CAP and consistency with the general state aid framework. So this is where basically we juggle when we worked on our state aid rules. Then obviously Green Deal that I mentioned, it's on the top of the agenda of the Commission and must be taken into account in all policies. You are aware of it, and you as member states are basically in the first line of implementation. As I said, we very much also built on experience which we gained in our previous case practice. That's not been ignored very much throughout the years, basically, of the implementation of the previous stated rules. We are taking notes of the issues and matters that popped out, that were repetitive, where we basically felt that the rules are not sufficient enough or not ambitious enough, are not going far enough, or need more clarity or adaptation to new reality. So basically all this we also try to take into account. Then obviously, as every process, there is some streamlining and simplification to basically get rid of any unnecessary administrative burden, although it might not seem so from your point of view, but from our point of view, we really try to get rid of unnecessary procedures. Here I summarize the changes in the guidelines, which is the big document here. Basically, I think it's a part 1. Previously, a part which we called Common Assessment Principles. That one has been remodeled entirely, and that is basically the consequence of the judgment of the court in Hinckley Point C, as I said. We removed from the scope of the guidelines certain measures which were already covered by other instruments, because obviously there shouldn't be, or often they were covered involving different conditions, and there is obviously no reason for having parallel rules. But on the other hand, we included some new measures. We transformed some in some aid measures, instead of aid amounts, which were as a fixed maximum aid amount, we changed it to maximum aid intensities. Very important thing, as I write here, adaptation of the new rules to better cater for the stated clearances of multidimensional scheme co-finance. This is the simplified assessment of the co-financed measures, which fall outside the scope of Article 42. I will talk about it later. We have just sealed our very first case yesterday, so we have very fresh experience with how this works. Green Deal I mentioned already several times. Then there was an update of several definitions or concepts. When it comes to definitions, we wherever there is a definition already existing in EU legislation, we use that one. We are not inventing a new definition. So basically, wherever there was a change in the definition, we followed that change as well. We removed obsolete, partly outdated rules. These were few. For example, there was an aid for Croatia, which was to be granted until a certain moment. That is basically totally outdated. There is no special treatment for Croatia now anymore. we enlarged the option of simplified costs. In the guidelines, as you may remember, there was no option, there was no possibility to use the simplified costs. Did not exist. It was covered by the block exemption regulation, and we did accept it. We allowed it also for the notified measures, notified under the guidelines, by way of analogy, because we basically considered that this was kind of an omission, and we didn't see the reason why not to have it there. So basically, by this revision, not only we included the simplified costs in the guidelines, we enlarged the scope. We allow it now also for the pure state aid, meaning not only for co-financed measures, which is the case of the block exemptions, because the simplified cost is something that needs assessment. So assessment does not exist under the block exemption regulations. So basically, it is limited for the pure state aid. It is limited to measures notified on the basis of the guidelines. So basically, it is there, and it is really allowed across the notified aid. So excuse me. The thing that is less popular, if I understand, with the member states, if I understood correctly, and that is the lowering of the publication thresholds. Previously, it was 100,000. Now it is 10,000 for the primary production, and I cannot really. And now. I cannot really put it down. So this is basically, we understand and we heard the objections from the member states, but our statistics showed that a minimum number of measures was published in the transparency register when the threshold for publication was 100,000. It is super high for the primary production, and the other threshold was also 500,000, also super high for the processing and marketing. And the transparency objective was not really served the purpose. So this was lowered, but this is, yep. Not for me. But this is, again, the cross-cutting measure. It was lowered in all the state aid instruments. As I said, the reason is to increase the transparency of granted aid.
Ma assegnati
Here,
0, disponibili 0.
Anything for me, or it's just a
No.
side discussion? Okay. Here I explain in more details our compatibility assessment under Article 107.3c. Further to the judgment in case Hinkley Point C, it was really a landmark judgment for the state aid and for the legal basis, which is Article 107.3c. We completely restructured it, and last but not least, it's not called common assessment principles anymore. It's called compatibility assessment. Many conditions remained. Some are given different importance because basically important thing that happened was that in our previous state aid decisions, we were given quite a prominence to the common objective when the measure followed the common objective. Now the court said that this is not a compatibility condition. It is not in stricto sensu included in this article of the treaty. And the court said you can only, the Commission, you can only base your assessment if you apply this legal basis on the basis on criteria that are included in that article. So basically what we have now, we have two sets of conditions. We have a negative condition and we have a positive condition. I should have started with that one. And as I said, objective of common interest is not a really compatibility condition. It can be used in the balancing test where we have to weigh positive and negative effects of the aid, but it cannot be the primary compatibility condition. So as I said, two sets of conditions, positive, negative. Positive one includes obligation to identify an economic activity. Here, the notification, meaning you, that you are in the first line because you are filling in the notification. You help us very much when you clearly identify an economic activity which is concerned by the aid. And then it must be proven that aid facilitates the development of aided economic activity. frankly speaking, from the case practice up until now, we started implementing this even before the new guidelines entered into force, because basically it is based on the judgment of the court. That means it is independent from our guidelines. So we started implementing it even before. So far, our case practice is that there is an economic activity always, there is an aid granted towards that economic activity, and usually the objective is indeed to contribute to the development of the economic activity. Yeah. So I go back to where I was, that is compatibility assessment under Article 1073C. As I said, a few months after these new rules entered into force, I can already give you some experience from the case practice and tell you what is going easily, what needs more work. And as I said, you are in the first line when you basically fill the notification. So perhaps I hope this helps you to understand what we need. So basically, for the positive condition, we need to identify the economic activity. Mostly it is clear, though not always, but mostly you have investments in I don't know, in irrigation. It is not investment in irrigation per se is not an economic activity. Economic activity linked to that would be the production of something, some agriculture product. So it's helpful if you can really be as clear as possible and to give us as much information as possible to identify this economic activity. And then we have to prove that this aid will indeed facilitate the development. Here we had to play a bit with the compensatory aid, because our rules, the state aid rules in favor of agriculture and forestry, are very specific and very unique in that we basically allow aid. It's a pure compensatory aid. It's a pure operating aid to compensate for damages and loss of income caused by natural disasters, adverse climatic events, animal diseases, plant pests, etc. Protected animals. This is very specific animal, which really does not exist neither under the strategy, under the CAP, Common Agriculture Policy, nor in other guidelines. So basically here, the judgment of the court in the case Hinkley Point C caught us a bit, because that aid does not contribute to aid to compensate for something, does not per se contribute to the development of any economic activity. It basically compensates for the loss. So you probably saw in the guidelines that we introduced an assumption which basically helps us to get through, and obviously given the importance of agricultural sector and the importance of climate change and environmental effects of the global warming. Basically, these mostly adverse climatic events are becoming more and more frequent. So it is understood in the Commission that we need to have this type of aid to allow compensation for the effect of adverse climatic events. So this was accepted, although it's pure operating aid. In return, DG Klima insisted on introducing in the guidelines a condition that it's not even a condition, it's basically kind of soft condition, which because it says the beneficiaries should make an effort to make some investments which would prevent the negative effects of the climate change. This is, for example, for investments. But we basically think that this is just it's nothing extra. It's a thing that is really in line with the climatic objectives of the EU, and it's also the interest of the member states to pursue this as much as possible. The incentive effect in the positive part, it's nothing new. That has hardly changed. You know it as it was before. Basically, the aid must incentivize the beneficiary to engage in new activities or engage in the activities differently. What is new is the obligation to prove that aid does not contravene provisions or general principles of EU law. This is the exact wording from this Hinkley Point C judgment. Now, it is obviously hard to make a screening of all possible applicable provisions and to prove that the aid measure does not contravene these. So so far, unless there is a really infringement of I don't know, mostly it would be environmental law or climatic rules or something like that, but it can be Sante legislation as well. Unless there is really already an infringement, the legal service accepted to say that there is no proof of such a breach of any EU law. But depending on the type measure, sometimes the measure might require some broader or more detailed analysis. So this is new basically. And then we have negative conditions. Under the negative condition, it stems from the Hinkley-Pointsy judgment that the Commission can assess balancing test, which basically serves to weight up the positive effects of the aid for the development of the economic activity, and the negative effects. Negative effect is basically the effect on trading conditions and competition in the single market. And to help us to prove that the aid has also positive effects, we can take into account other objectives of the aid, which are basically consistent with EU priorities or common objectives. Here we would indeed, I think the guidelines list forestry strategy, climatic strategies, Green Deal, etc. So if the aid is consistent or even contributes to achieving the objective of these documents, then obviously and if the aid is proportionate and it's necessary, etc., all these conditions that were there even before, then we can conclude that such positive effects of aid outweigh the negative effects of the aid. I mentioned at the beginning that we streamlined a bit our rules and we removed from the scope of the guidelines. I think this would hold true also for the block exemption regulations, certain measures that are already covered by other state aid instruments. Mostly these measures concern Chapter 3. This is aid in favor of rural areas. Some of you might know that basically this aid in favor of rural areas does not fall under Article 42 of the treaty. So basically it's something which does not, strictly speaking, fall under the scope of business of agriculture and forestry. It's been included in our rules basically for very pragmatic purposes to allow approval under the state aid rules of the co-financed measures in favor of rural areas, which were previously included in the Rural Development Regulation 1305/2013, and now they still continue in the Strategic Plan Regulation, which is 2021/2115. On the other hand, we basically had in the previous guidelines all measures that were also covered by the rural development, but these measures basically are covered by other instruments as well. We identified them. They are mostly covered by the general block exemption regulation or regional aid guidelines. Mostly these were, I give here the list, mostly they were investments, and there was aid for knowledge transfer and information actions and for advisory services. Because they are covered by other instruments, there was no need to have it twice in our instrument and in GBER or RAC, so they went away. But we maintain those that are not covered by other instruments, so that indeed we can efficiently give the stated approval for co-financed measures. We identified some new elements which needed to be covered and were not by the stated rules. In section 1213, which previously covered animal diseases and plant pests, we enlarged the scope by invasive alien species for all aspects of that section, which is prevention, control, and eradication. We basically considered that because invasive alien species are largely covered by the Sante legislation, they have a place in the stated as well. We included emerging diseases, basically under the same conditions like the listed diseases. I'm sorry. We understand that in the past, many member states indeed had difficulties with not being able to grant aid for emerging diseases. So we assessed and we considered that they indeed should be covered. The novelty is result-based schemes. This is basically the the consequence of the climatic objectives of the Commission. They are included in agri-environmental climate commitments and in forest environmental and climate commitments. When it comes to aid to make good damage caused by protected animals, we enlarge the definition. This is mostly this enlargement of the definition is result of the comments that we received from Italy. We understood that basically to cover protected animals is not enough, because in Italy, you know it better, maybe you can even explain to me, it's also animals that are not protected per se, but they cannot be shot or killed in certain areas, if I understand. So this enlarged definitions indeed to take into account this specific situation in Italy. Because, as I wrote, the legislation provides specific rules to preserve the population. And then we have some new indirect costs, for example, reduced production capacity. Because here, actually, because we receive many questions when it comes to aid in favor of or to compensate for the damage caused by protected animals. It must be clear that the objective of this measure is environmental, meaning it is to preserve the protected animals. Because you know that a farmer would just shoot a protected animal if the damage is repeated, if his flock is repeatedly attacked, he would just shoot that animal because he would not see other way out. For us, we want to protect protected animals. That makes sense. So basically here the objective is environmental. It's not the compensation is just a tool to protect these animals. As regards forestry section and sections and forestry chapter, we have no more limitation on the range of beneficiaries, with some very few exceptions, which is listed below. That is for area for specific disadvantages resulting from certain mandatory requirements in forests. Here we have still categories of beneficiaries which are eligible for aid. These are private forest holders, forest managers, and their associations. That is in line with the strategic plan. The aid amounts, just like in the guidelines, were replaced by 100% aid intensity. You know that in certain measures, not only in forestry but in agriculture as well, I mean, from the top of my head, I remember agri-environmental climate commitments or welfare of animals. We had maximum aid amounts, and the evaluation showed that this was largely insufficient. And because we consider that objectives of this measure do merit full compensation, we replaced it simply by 100%. So whatever a beneficiary spent, up to 100% of his or her costs can be covered by the state aid. Obviously, the final aid intensity is up to the member state to define. But instead of putting a cap on the aid by defining the aid amount, we have 100%. We think that this is really a good change towards the beneficiaries and towards incentivizing these type of aid. Another important thing is in aid in favor of forest, environment, and climate services. There, it obviously we also included collective and result-based schemes, because basically such forestry measures would be in the first line for carbon sequence and storage. So this would be very important for the climatic objectives of the EU. And to incentivize the use of this measure, not only we have 100% aid intensity, but we have also the incentive payment possible up to 20% of the compensation. It is really money for nothing. It is really just money to incentivize the use, because our evaluation showed that the uptake of this measure under the previous rules, when only additional costs and income foregone could have been compensated, was not sufficient. And because the green and climatic objectives are so high on the agenda of the Commission, it was accepted that this 20% incentive payment, which is pure operating aid, it's not proportionate, it does not basically meet many conditions, but still we, at the Commission level, we agreed that this is very important to incentivize beneficiaries to take up this measure because the climatic objectives need it. Other changes, I mentioned already that we updated references and definitions. This is mostly those that were changed across the years in the legislation of reference, for example, plant pest or the protected animals that was changed for the other reason that I already explained. Some other definitions were simply deleted, for example, less developed regions, EU25, EU27. Why was this deleted? Because this concept came from the regional aid. And we used it to differentiate the aid intensity for the investment. Now we decided that we will be consistent with the strategic plan regulation, which basically set the one aid intensity. There are obviously always derogations and exceptions up to 80, up to 100, but the general aid intensity increased is 65%, independently of the definition of less developed regions, EU25, EU27. So we abandoned this concept that is coming from regional aid. And for the investments in agriculture, the aid intensity is, I think it's quite generous, it's quite high. We have new definitions, which obviously clearly stem from the new priorities, carbon farming schemes, invasive alien species, because we included the measure in the guidelines. We also have to provide the definition. Same goes for the emerging diseases. The fact that the simplified cost option was enlarged, that I already explained, it's been largely used so far. I can say that I've seen myself more than half of the schemes that are notified are using simplified cost options. Example where it is very well used is, for example, for animal welfare, for poultry, for example. You know that a farmer can have hundreds of pieces of poultry, and it can be really cumbersome to calculate the real cost. So often there is basically an expert body, an agricultural institute or any other expert body which calculates.
Scusate.
Yep.
Scusate l'interruzione, chiedono in chat alla dottoressa Blehova di parlare un po' più lentamente, perché così grazie dottoressa, perché così l'interprete ha modo di esporre più chiaramente la traduzione. Grazie, scusate.
Ok, capito. So I was in this simplified cost option. So here I'm giving the example from the case practice. Recently, I've seen this used for the animal welfare measure, where a measure covers poultry. A farmer can have hundreds of pieces of poultry, and it's obviously cumbersome to calculate the real cost. So an expert body usually is asked to calculate an average price, which would take into account the market prices of any material used, energy, premises, etc. And that average would be applied per unit. In this case, it would be a piece of poultry, meaning one animal. But it can be basically used with some exceptions across the aid. And as I said, I've seen that it's been largely used because obviously it simplifies administration at the level of the member state. It is, on the other hand, more work for us because we need really detailed information and we need to assess that there will be no necessary overcompensation. It is the inherent feature of the simplified cost that there might be losers and there might be winners, meaning sometimes a farmer gets more than were his real cost, sometimes less. This is basically the inherent feature of this simplified option, but the average should be at the proper level, proportionate. And then I mentioned already that we judged that the aid amounts for certain measures were not anymore suitable, and we replaced it by the aid intensity, mostly up to 100%. So this is really to cater for the cost. It doesn't. We basically considered two options of increasing the maximum aid amount and options of going to aid intensity. And it's I think for the types of aid measure where we replaced the aid amount by aid intensity, the best option is to have the aid intensity up to 100% of the real eligible costs. I already mentioned that whatever was obsolete or outdated went away, that we deleted. So that was it for the guidelines. Now I'm in the block exemption regulation. Basically, whatever and all the measures that were block exempted under the previous regulation remain by and large block exempted. Just like for the guidelines, we introduce updates which are based on the EU regulatory framework. We updated whatever was necessary. For the block exemption regulation, the situation vis-a-vis the strategic plan regulation was a bit different. We basically tried to be consistent to the extent possible. So it is, while it is possible to obtain the stated approval for co-financed measures also under the ABER, because it's a regulation which allows block exemption, which does not have an assessment, ex-ante assessment, here we still have the condition. So basically the measure being co-financed can still be block exempted under the block exemption regulation, but provided that indeed the measure corresponds to the conditions of...
Non lo cambia, non ho capito perché.
Io sto facendo dal 12 al 16 ora, però sta tutto a
block
zero.
exemption regulation. Under the guidelines, I will explain later, we really provided for the more simplified procedure.
Quando è stato spedito?
When it comes to the, you know that in the ABER, for many measures, we have the notification thresholds. We distinguish between the possibility of block exempting the measure and the need to notify it. Most of the thresholds remain the same. Some were increased, and obviously for new measures, the thresholds were set. As in the guidelines, we lowered the communication thresholds. As I said before, it's a cross-cutting exercise which concerns all instruments. We very much enlarged the scope of the block exemption regulation. Here, we still have to move into the remit of what we call enabling regulation. I think I have somewhere. Yes, so-called enabling regulation is regulation 2015-1588. That regulation allows us to exempt only certain categories, and we cannot go beyond that. So if the member states wonder why we still insist on, or we cannot, why don't we block exempt certain measures, it is because of that, because we are basically bound by this enabling regulation. I think I was here. I will move here. Despite, so basically for being able to block exempt a measure, to put it under the block exemption regulation, there are two conditions. It must be allowed by the enabling regulation, and we must have sufficient case experience. We cannot block exempt new measures. That is simply the rule that we have to respect. So, as I said, we basically really largely increase the scope of the block exemption regulation because many measures we acquired sufficient case practice under the previous rules. Very important changes also concerns also the forestry sector. You know that under the previous block exemption regulation, only forestry which was co-financed under the CAP could have been block exempted. Now we allow also pure state aid. This is also the result of the two things. It's a result of the fact that we acquired sufficient case practice and the result of the Commission priorities in the area of environment and climate changes. So here we also want to simplify state aid for the forestry as much as possible, because basically the forestry aid covered by our rules has mostly environmental and climatic objectives. We don't have, you know, that we always ask the member states to exclude forest-based industries or pure extraction, etc., because that is not in the remit of our rules. the most important change from the procedural point of view is the fact that we do not carry out any more ex ante checks. You know that under the previous ABER, the block exemption regulation, the member states were an obligation to send us information sheet and all relevant informations before the measure was put in implementation, and we assessed and we could make comments. Now, obviously, you member states, you could always ask for the immediate publication, meaning you were not really bound to wait for the Commission approval, but still there was some ex ante check. Now we don't do that. We don't see anymore whatever you sent. We don't see it anymore. It goes directly to publication. It has its pros and cons. I am aware of it. Pro is obviously that it's a swift procedure, it's fast, you can put the measure in place immediately. It obviously gives us more time to concentrate on notified cases. So basically, hopefully, with time, the notifications will be approved more rapidly. Right now, it's a bit the opposite, I would say, because basically the decisions are getting longer. And we have really many notifications because of the new rules, because they entered into force. So it's normal that at the beginning of this of the period of the application of the new rules, we also have really flood of notifications. We have really everyday cases are coming in. So right now it seems that it takes even longer to approve the notification, but hopefully with time this time will shorten. So basically no more check of block exempting measures. Now also, as you know, that this was specificity of the agricultural block exemption regulation, because under the general block exemption regulation there never was ex ante check. So basically we aligned with the general block exemption regulation. Here we also understood the calls from some member states. I mean, I must say here personally that there were member states which basically really liked these ex ante checks because it gave them not 100% legal certainty, because there still was no decision of the Commission, but it gave them some degree of legal certainty. Now, these measures are subject to ex post evaluation, not all of them. The ex post evaluation is only targets certain cases which are selected on the basis of certain criteria. And obviously, because the Commission did not carry out this ex ante check, it might be that some deficiencies are found. But on the other hand, many member states also considered that block exemption regulations set out very strict and detailed conditions, so why not to be able to go ahead immediately and implement the measure immediately? So it's a fast track, and we understand that as well. Main changes in the revised ABER. Some measures were removed here as well because they will be covered by the general block exemption regulation. So basically, this is the streamlining, not to be confused between the two instruments. But we have many new or extended exempted measure. For example, damage caused by adverse climatic events. As I said, under the previous rules, we acquired sufficient experience. We consider that it can now be block exempted. Same goes for the protected animals. Disadvantages related to Natura 2000. But only for agricultural areas. Also for agricultural areas. We have startup aid, we have very basic services and infrastructure, which is co-financed. The very important thing I understand, because we receive many questions from the member states, new articles 39 and 40, and I think it's 60 and 61, the CLLD projects and EIP project. You know that this was previously included in the general block exemption regulation, but the scope is basically limited to projects and activities which fall under our rules. So it was excluded from the general block exemption regulation and moved to agricultural block exemption regulation. I know that this is of big interest to member states because we really keep receiving many questions. As I said, there is no change in the fundamental rule. Basically, we need to take into account enabling regulation. that this regulation basically allows us to block exempt generally aid in favor of SMEs, which are active in agriculture sector. And then also we have it when aid is granted in accordance with the strategic plan regulation and is either co-financed or granted as additional national financing that is on equal footing. The other categories that the enabling regulation allows us to exempt are listed here, but as you can see, I'm not going to go through it basically because this is what you can see in the exemption regulation. New CAP framework, as I said, is very much shaped our revision. It was very important element. This new approach which the Commission opted for the CAP, this delivery model, this subsidiarity-based approach, was really a challenge for us technically, because previously it was quite easy for us to copy-paste the rural development regulation. That's not the case now. So the concept remains the same. Whatever falls under Article 42, these are agricultural activities, state aid rules do not apply. This is decided by the co-legislators. So whatever measure you have co-financed and which falls under the scope of Article 42 treaty, no need to have the approval under the state aid. However, whatever falls outside, this is what I mentioned, forestry and aid for rural areas, for that, member states still need approval under the state aid rules. This is the basic, this is the principle which has not changed because this is also continued in the strategic plan regulation. We have two situations here. We have pure state aid. We have in the guidelines what we call rural development-like measures. These are measures which are covered also by the strategic plan regulation, and we have also measures which are not rural development-like. This is basically compensatory aid that I already mentioned, because there is really very specific animal for our rules. When it comes to rural development-like measures, these were the measures that indeed in the past were basically a blueprint of the previous CAP rules. We couldn't do that now because basically we would have our section of the guidelines empty. There would be no conditions. So we assessed each measure case by case. And it might seem like a very strange hybrid of the previous rules and novelties which we took over from the strategic plan regulation. But as I said, because we need to be more precise in the state aid rules, we assess on the case-by-case basis what are the needs for each and every type of the aid. We still align and we really try to remain consistent with the CAP as much as possible. Here I have the example of increased aid intensity for investment aid. I think that's quite a change because, as I said, I think our investment aid intensities are far the most generous. We have result-based schemes, we have collecting schemes. We also align some definitions. You may see that in the strategic plan regulation example, I think it's the agricultural area. It's not defined. It can be what the member state will consider as agricultural area. And I think we are making reference to that as well. So we are not insisting on any substantial definition which would lay down the conditions. Here we accept that the member states are really free to tailor their strategic plan measures to their needs, and we really don't want to put any constraints to this subsidiarity approach. We think that it's really important that the member state decide what is best for them. On the other hand, so basically for the pure state aid, it was really just a matter, it was a matter of consistency. We really wanted to be consistent because, as I said, the effects of financing do not change whether the resources come from the state budget or from the union budget, and the effects on competition and trade are the same. So that is hence the consistency objective. But on the other hand, as I said, for the measures which fall outside the scope of Article 42 and which do require the state aid clearance, it was a real challenge how to cover them in the state aid rules. in the previous rules, we basically had copy-paste of the rural development regulation. So if the co-financed measure was approved under Rural Development Regulation 1305, 2013, it was very likely consistent also and compatible also under the state aid rules. Now that obviously we could not envisage in the state aid rules all sorts of possible nuances that the member state may design in their strategic plan measures. So we developed a simplified procedure, something that we call a compatibility presumption clause. You can find them in the guidelines. It's not in the ABER because it's basically, that would be no-go, and it's not possible to have these for the block exempted measures. For the block exemptions, the conditions must be as precise as possible. But in the guidelines, you can find them in points 4, 9, 9 as regards forestry measures co-financed under the CAP, and in point 635 for the co-financed measures in favor of rural areas. The idea was to simplify this in such a way that whatever the member states design in their strategic plan would be compatible under the state aid, provided that certain, what we call state aid red lines, are respected. This means that the measure must be co-financed, the aid must not be granted in favor of working capital, it cannot be operating aid, it cannot be granted to undertakings in difficulty, and so what we call the Gendorf principle, meaning if there is a negative decision with recovery vis-a-vis a beneficiary, the amount which is still to be recovered must be taken into account. So these are really the basic state aid principles. And the compatibility assessment, which is basically in part 1, which is a lot of, which basically really occupies big part of our decisions right now, would not apply. As I said, we have just agreed on our very first case. We were waiting which member state would be the courageous one to notify it, and it was in the end one German land. And we have just agreed with the legal service our first decision. So it is indeed going to work. What the member state needs to do is to prove that the transparency requirement is respected, but not the transparency requirement under the stated rules, but the transparency requirement as it is defined in the strategic plan regulation or the CAP rules. In this case, in this German case, indeed, there is, I suppose that this is the condition that must be respected under the strategic plan anyway. There was also a question from the legal service as regards the incentive effect of the aid. In this German case, we inquired a bit. It is basically about the aid application. Under the stated rules, we do require that the aid application is submitted before any project or work start. This is, although we do not apply the compatibility assessment as such for the legal service, this is important that is still respected. Now, here it is for the national rules to set out the conditions. In this German case, the legal basis indeed required that the beneficiaries, that the recipients of the financing do submit the aid applications. I suppose that this is some basic requirement. No aid would be, or no financing under the strategic plan would be granted without aid application anyway. But just to bring to your attention, just to draw your attention to the fact that the aid application still must be submitted before the work starts. We still have to prove, because these are the conditions of Article 1073C, we still have to prove that the financing, I mean, on purpose, I'm not calling it aid anymore because this is the financing under the strategic plan. The financing still contributes to the development of the economic activity, but to me, it seems like it goes without saying. When you finance something, you finance an economic activity, and that economic activity will then undergo some development. And that there is no breach of union law. Here, we argued with the legal service, and it is basically agreed argument that because the strategic plans are approved by the Commission, because they are approved by the Commission decision, and they are in line with the strategic plan regulation, otherwise they wouldn't be approved, they do respect already per se the CAP rules. And as long as we have no indication that there would be other breach and infringement, for example, of environmental legislation, this condition also normally should not be the problem. So basically, this is how I'm really happy to give you the details of how these compatibility presumption clauses will work. I think the most important thing was really to have agreed the first decision. Now this first decision will be used as the template, and obviously once we have the line agreed with the legal service, this should not be the problem. And I think this brings me to my last slide. In this last slide, I basically give you the very clear overview of the available state aid clearance for the co-financed measure. So as I said, this is only for co-financed measures. Basically, you have several possibilities. Either you can block exempt under block exemption regulation, provided that the co-financed measure is identical to the measure in the block exemption regulation. If it is not identical, you can notify under the guidelines, and then we apply this compatibility presumption clause, which I just described. Here, these both instruments are available for forestry and partially for rural areas, because I said that there are still several measures which are covered by the strategic plan, but which do not fall anymore under our rules. So for that, you would have to go under the general block exemption regulation or regional aid guidelines. Agriculture, here we have only these flashes because basically there is no need for the approval under the state aid rules. Then we have horizontal instruments. Here, as I said, regional aid guidelines or general block exemption regulation, not available for, or only it is available for only several forestry and rural areas measures, but others are totally covered by that. And then you have always de minimis, which is available for all measures. It would be general de minimis, meaning 1407, because we are not in the scope of agriculture, because agriculture does not need the state aid clearance. So it would be general de minimis with the aid ceiling up to 200,000 for the 3 fiscal years, calculated on the rolling basis. I think this brings me to the last slide. Thank you very much for attention. And now I'm waiting for your questions. Thank you very much for forwarding me some questions already. I've looked at them and I can answer those that I remember. But if you have other questions, please don't hesitate to ask. The floor is yours now.
Mi intrometto solo per ricordare, come ha già detto la dottoressa Blehova, che è in possesso di alcuni quesiti che erano stati posti per iscritto nei giorni scorsi, ai quali lei gentilmente vorrà rispondere, e ho visto che in chat ci sono alcune domande per la dottoressa Blehova che le interpreti e traduttrici stanno appunto traducendo in inglese per lei, tempo permettendo ovviamente, se sarà possibile rispondere anche a queste.
So I was explaining the difference between the two articles, 60 and 71. It's basically in the level of conditions, while under Article 60 we have some eligible costs. So basically any financing must be limited to those costs. But on the other hand, we allow the aid rates up to the maximum rate of the project financed. Under Article 61, which are limited aid amounts, there are no eligible costs. So basically, whatever is necessary can be covered by this lump sum, this aid amount. The only costs that remain are for municipalities. And this is the reason of I mentioned that already several times, I explained that already several times, of the enabling regulation. The enabling regulation does not allow us to block exempt and block any aid for large undertakings. So basically that in general principle is that aid must be, which is block exempted, meaning covered by ABER, must be limited to SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises or micro enterprises. But we still can grant aid for research development, for environment, employment, culture, etc. And where the municipalities are part of the CLLD project which pursue these objectives, they can receive block exempted aid even if generally they are considered as large undertakings. So this is basically where we believe that we found the loophole in the enabling regulation, and so basically this is really to allow the maximum use of this article. This was the first question. Please do not hesitate to stop me if you have some additional information. Second question, all'articolo 4 para 1 lettera U sono previste le soglie per gli aiuti individuali. Che cosa si intende con 2 milioni di euro per impresa per il progetto? I think it's just that basically this threshold, a beneficiary can participate in several projects which are CLLD projects, and basically there is a threshold. So it's really that. More details, I think only I could give you more details only on the case-by-case basis, knowing the elements of a specific case. Possono partecipare ai progetti CLLD comuni di qualcuna dimensione? Yes. The answer is yes. In the projects which I said that we have, meaning research, development, environment, employment, forestry, etc., those that are enumerated in Article 61, second para, in those, indeed, we do not limit the participation of municipalities by size. So it's limited by the type of project, but not by size. And then this is an interesting question. In base all'articolo 11 para 4 sembrerebbe che per l'articolo 61 non si debba procedere alla comunicazione di estensione. Yes, this is you know that these EIP and CLLD projects were previously covered by the General Block Exemption Regulation, but because they exclusively concern our areas of activity, they were transferred basically from the General Block Exemption Regulation to Agricultural Block Exemption Regulation, and this condition in that you mentioned, which one was it? The Articolo 11. Also was basically transferred. It is indeed the case, and the reason for that is that these are very simplified measures. For those block exempted scheme, the beneficiaries cannot always be identified. There are no eligible costs. So basically, there is just a lump sum. So there is no information that could feed this information sheet. General Block Exemption Regulation also excludes those projects from annual reporting. So this is an additional element. Block Exemption Regulation, for the time being, does not exclude these projects from general from the reporting obligation, but our intention is to do that, to modify the Block Exemption Regulation. That is for your internal information, that we consider that this will be done in the end. It's obviously the question of the approval by the Commission, but for your internal information, it is our intention indeed to follow the General Block Exemption Regulation and have the same approach when it comes to reporting. This brings me to another question, which I must say I don't quite understand. Si chiede se il percorso delineato di seguito per SRG 06 è corretto sotto i profili. I don't know what is the SRG 06, so it's hard for me to answer this question. Maybe, I don't know who is the author of this question, but maybe you can clarify a bit what is the SRG 06.
Scusate, io posso spiegare cos'è. SRG 06 is it consists in two parts. One part is leader strategies, and the other part are the management cost. But this is not my question. I don't know if is there the colleague that formulated the answer.
Because the question has many elements, many conditions. So What is the question here? Is it whether it could be acceptable under Article 60 or 61? Otherwise, I'll just continue and then we can get back to that, or you can always send us the question in writing.
Allora, nel caso delle strategie di sviluppo locale del leader, noi finanziamo sia il gruppo di azione locale per interventi che il GAL attua direttamente, sia ci sono beneficiari terzi finanziati dai GAL. Quindi chiedevo se la procedura corretta è quella di prevedere quindi un regime per aiuti direttamente, diciamo, di cui è beneficiario il GAL, e quindi tenere conto di un regime unico che va ai GAL, stabilendo che ovviamente sia rispettata la soglia dei 2 milioni di euro per GAL, perché la soglia di notifica è 2 milioni per progetto e per impresa, e poi istituire altri regimi di aiuto da parte dei GAL nei confronti dei beneficiari terzi. E quando un ente locale interviene nella strategia ed è beneficiario, per esempio, credo debba avere meno di 5.000 abitanti, non può essere beneficiario un comune con più di 5.000 abitanti, altrimenti rientrerebbe nel concetto di grande impresa, come si diceva prima. Quindi vorrei avere certezza di questo, diciamo, percorso che noi come Regione vorremmo seguire, quindi spacchettare, ecco, diciamo così, regimi lì dove i GAL, i gruppi di azione locale che attuano la strategia sono direttamente beneficiari rispetto agli aiuti che i GAL concedono a soggetti terzi, con la costituzione di altri regimi, ovviamente tenendo conto dei costi ammissibili previsti dall'ABER.
Okay, yes. In principle, yes, these 8 measures are designed to include GALs. When we already had the question about the participation of municipalities, and we proposed affirmative answer, then yes, they can participate, but I think that there was a discussion then at the broader state aid level in DG competition. I will tell you in full transparency, I don't remember what was the answer in the end. So I don't want to give you the answer here, but I know that there is a question in Commission e-Wiki. I don't know if you know e-Wiki. It's basically state aid instrument, which is external, which is accessible to member states. It is, I don't know if in Italy it is accessible at the regional level or only at the central level, but there is a question. I'm not asking you to go and make search in e-Wiki, but if you could please forward me this question, the very same that you have in this document to my email address, I will send you the copy of that answer, because I don't want to give you wrong information, and I don't know, I don't remember what was in the end agreed for the municipalities participating in GALs, but we had that question, and as I said, the answer was not straightforward, so there was a discussion. So please send me this question to my email address, which is, I think the Signora Silvia can give that to you. Please do not hesitate to send that to me, and I will find the answer for you. Like I said, I really prefer not to give you information and not even a guess or estimate, I think, because this was really largely discussed. And there were differing views.
Certo, assolutamente.
Ok. Ok, con riferimento al punto 1 della nota, I suppose this is our letter, cosa si intende esattamente con la frase se uno Stato membro desidera mantenere un regime di aiuti istituito in conformità dei precedenti regolamenti di esenzione per categoria? There is a difference when it comes to existing schemes. There is a difference between the guidelines and the block exemption. The guidelines are considered the soft law, and in the guidelines we have appropriate measures. It is for the member state to commit to adapt their schemes to revised schemes, and the scheme can continue, and you don't have to notify unless you make changes that go beyond the revision. Another example is we right now have Italian scheme. It's an investment scheme where the aid intensity was limited to, I think, 40%. Now, the intensity can go up to 65, but this is not adaptation to new rules. It is the use of the possibility. So this must be notified. This is just to explain the guidelines. Maybe it's clear to you, but for the sake of completeness, I say that. Under the block exemption regulation, because it is a regulation, it basically is repelled. It basically ceased to exist. The exempted schemes cannot continue. So basically, cosa si intende? The member state must send new information sheet. If you want to continue the same block exempted scheme, there is no automatism. There is no automatism in continuation. You have to send a new information sheet. So basically, the block exempted schemes which you have in place still, because I think if I'm not mistaken, it's the 6 months after the 1st January, you have to send us new information sheet. This is what is the situation for the block exemption regulation. So yes, it's a nuova misura di aiuti, seppur identica, but it's the fact that it's a regulation which does not allow to continue the schemes on the basis, which are block exempted on the basis of the legal basis which does not exist anymore. So it's a different situation compared to guidelines. Ok, another question. In ambito ABER, nel caso in cui non si sia riusciti a terminare l'iter del rilascio delle concessioni entro 30 giugno per le misure di aiuto per cui non è previsto il rispetto del principio di incentivazione, calamità, eccetera, è possibile utilizzare le domande presentate sotto un regime. We just discussed this basically, but not for the block exempted measure. We discussed exactly, it must be Italian principle because it's another Italian scheme. We exactly discussed this question, but it concerned a notified aid. Italy proposed to use the aid application submitted under the previous scheme, but which did not receive aid, to use them under the new scheme. And we discussed it, and it is our internal, so basically this is the opinion which is internal, internal opinion that yes, it is possible, provided that the incentive effect is, in that case, it's an incentive effect that applies, is respected, and also all the other conditions are respected. The mere transfer of received aid applications from one scheme to another, if it's the basically continuation of the precedent scheme, should be possible. Under the ABER, we have not discussed it, but given that the legal basis ceased to exist, I would be very prudent here. I would be very cautious to tell you that yes, it is possible. My personal opinion is that your scheme, block exempted scheme, will cease to exist. You have to submit new information sheet as I explained before. So I think that also the aid applications should be transferred. So CD. This being said, as I explained, there is no ex ante check. So basically, it is really up to you to decide how you want to implement this. Next question. È possibile avere delucidazioni sulla valutazione prevista dall'articolo 12 dell'ABER? Yes, this evaluation is new for both instruments. It's new for ABER and for the guidelines. It's a cross-cutting exercise. It is not specific for the agricultural rules, so we are a bit in the hands of our horizontal colleagues. I will tell you what we, because also it is our interest to have as many clarifications as possible. I will tell you what clarifications we've got. For the scheme, you know that there are criteria determining which schemes, block exempted or notified, are subject to evaluation and for which the member states must submit the evaluation plan. Here, the question concerns ABE, so I will limit this explanation also to the block exemption regulation, but if you find it useful, I can also give you some information about this process, about what will happen under the notified aid as well. So when it comes to block exemption, you member states, you submit information sheet. Separately, you will have to submit the evaluation plan if your scheme, which you intend to block exempt, fulfills the condition for evaluation. Separately, via SANI, you will have to submit evaluation plan. This evaluation plan, this submission will receive separate SA, meaning state aid number, but in our internal registration system, it will be merged so that indeed two cases, so that it is clear for any future generations and for anybody that the cases are linked. This evaluation plan, even if it concerns block exempted measure, must be approved. It means that we, the Commission, we have to approve it by non-objection decision separately. So even for the block exempted schemes, we will have to have the Commission decision approving the evaluation plan. If there is no approval of the evaluation plan within 6 months from its submission to the Commission, you, the member state, you will have to discontinue the block exempted measure. This is what we were explained. Now, this is a general horizontal procedure, and we are just I'm just a messenger here. So basically, this is what it's a lot of work for us, because to evaluate the evaluation plan, it's not an obvious thing, it's not easy thing, and we indeed will have to go through the procedure of the decision. Such decision, you must have it within 6 months, otherwise you have to discontinue the block exempted measure. So this is what the procedure that we just learned actually this week or last week that we will have to follow. Aiuti per il pagamento di premi assicurativi e per i contributi finanziari ai fondi di mutualizzazione. So basically here it's the question about the threshold of 30% which applies to the qualification of adverse climatic event as adverse climatic event. Here I would like to say that this threshold does not apply to insurance premium or contribution to mutual fund, because here the eligible cost is not the compensation of the damage or loss of income. Eligible cost is the cost of insurance or contribution to mutual fund. So basically, here you do not, I mean, this concept of 30% is not relevant vis-a-vis the insurance premium or contribution to mutual fund. That is, so this is, I would like to say straight away. So basically, è prevista una soglia di danno per perdite causate da episodi? No. No, as I said, this threshold is not relevant for the aid in favor of insurance premium and contribution to mutual funds. It's a different concept. The question, misure forestali here. Okay, so this is the question. È corretto considerare gli interventi nelle sugherette e castanetti come attività extra-agricole? I understand that it can be the case. It's I'll open the instrument. I think it's in the guidelines in the forestry. First of all, the chestnuts and the cork are Annex 1 products. So in principle, they fall under Article 42. In the past, we had aid schemes, for example, for plant pest, which ravaged chestnut orchards. So we accepted aid to compensate for this plant pest under agricultural section. So I repeat, the chestnuts and cork are Annex 1 products. This being said, yes, we stated at the introductory point of the forestry section that certain activities linked to these types can fall under the forestry. I think I've never seen any aid scheme which would be a forestry scheme in its essence, and which would cover chestnuts and corks. I haven't seen it, but that doesn't mean that it cannot happen. I think we will know when we see it what measures can fall under the forestry measures. I think that forestry aid schemes are to a certain extent simpler. There is less conditions, often higher aid intensity, so it might be the interest of the member states to use those sections. But I think here it is important to bear in mind that, as I said, chestnut and cork are both Annex 1 products. So in principle, they would mostly fall under agriculture section. I cannot give the example of the activities that would fall under the forestry. I've never seen it. It's really, this is the opening which says that it is not excluded, but I haven't seen it in practice. Next question. What is that question? Si chiede conferma che con attività extraagricole nelle zone rurali di cui all'articolo 1 dell'ABER si fa riferimento esclusivamente alla sezione 7. Yes, it is section 7 of the block exemption regulations. So that is correct. And sezione 7, tutti riportano alla propria 2 lettera B, that the okay, so basically for the purposes of the stated and of the approval of the co-financed measures under the stated rules, yes, this is what I already explained before, if you want to have this stated approval by way of block exempted measure, then it must be identical. And yes, it is generally useful to submit us together with the notification, but here I'm talking about notification, the rural development measure, which is approved, which is included in the strategic plan. When it comes to block exemption regulation and the information sheet which you submit, I think it's fine if you include in that information sheet web link works, by clicking on it. Here, I would like to say that for the reason of transparency and also more information, often member states include the link which brings us to the general web page, and which we don't know. Often it's a language we don't master, and then we don't know how to find the document we are looking for. So if it is possible to include the link which brings us directly to the measure, it can be very helpful. So basically for the co-financed measure which you wish to exempt on the basis of the block exemption regulation, yes, the measure must be identical, and it's enough to put the functional link to that measure.
May I explain some points of this question? I am Cristiana Trudo. I work in Lombardy region, and I just like just to say that because we have 2 levels. One level is a strategic plan, and after that there is a second level. There is a regional level with a regional complement of rural development. That's why I was thinking that we need a national scheme and not a regional scheme because of this identical requirement. But maybe it's just like, as you said, that we can have a regional scheme with 2 annex, one of the intervention, national intervention, and the second one with regional intervention. Is this correct?
What you mean? One would be the regional. What was the first one? You said regional intervention, and the first one was?
Because there is
I understand. I will tell you what I understand. I understand that you have some specific regional measures which are specific for the region. And I know we are aware that in Italy, it's a bit problem that basically regions have been waiting for the central government to notify for the stated clearance the measures that are included in the strategic plan, correct? Is that correct?
Yes, is this correct?
Exactly. And we had many questions as to whether the regions could move ahead and just notify. it's entirely for Italy to decide. If the central, it's not for us. Whoever, it is fine for us if the region notifies. We have, you know that in the past we had many measures, just like in the pure state aid. The same applies to rural development. It is for you Lombardia. If Lombardia decides to notify, you notify. We accept because it's a public authority basically that notifies. If it is central government, there are many framework schemes which were notified by the central government. We accept, we assess. If it is specific for the region, we accept. It's really for you to find the way with the central government. And so basically, if the central government notifies us kind of overarching framework strategic plan measure, fine for us. Important is that it really includes all possible modalities of each region, because it really must cover the given strategic plan measure. But because we have this simplified approach, we don't go into the details. We only need that what we are approving is identical, is basically indeed the rural development measure that is in the strategic plan that is already approved by the Commission, because our simplified assessment, which I described before, is really based on the fact that we have the measure that is already approved by the Commission. So it is entirely up to you. If the central government decides to notify, it's good if they say that they notify all measures across the Italian regions. If you as Lombardia decide to notify, we will basically provide the state aid approval for the given measure only for Lombardia. So it is, for us, it's not a difference.
Thank you very much. Perfect.
Yeah, but I understand that there have been difficulties to agree that. Now, I also have to say that we, as the Commission, we would simply encourage the central government to do that, because I don't know how many regions there are in Italy, but if you receive for the same rural development measure, for example, I don't know, basic services in the villages, it's a big difference if you receive one notification and if you receive them 15, then obviously it's time-wise, it's disadvantaging for you as well, because it's logical that it will take time. Here, I must also say that recently it's been long time has been consumed by the translation issues, because it seems that our translation services are really overwhelmed with the work, and we often have to wait for the translation into the language of the member state very long time. So basically, we have 2 months deadline. Within that deadline, often 1 month, even more, depending on the length of the decision, up to 6 weeks is consumed by the translation. So we have very little time to act, to basically work on the case as such. And we really, the longest time slot is for the translation. So this is what I'm saying, that we would really encourage, if there is a way to make the central government to notify. This would really spare time to you and to us. It would be the most pragmatic thing. But if that is not possible, and I can also understand the situation that the region simply wants to go ahead, and the central government, for one reason or another, is not notifying, then if the region decides to notify, we do act. We have to accept that. Okay, we have again Article 60. What is the articolo 60 del regolamento APER della Commissione? Fa riferimento agli aiuti allo sviluppo locale di tipo partecipativo ed è determinate condizioni applicabili alle spese di GAL. Yes. Nel caso in cui i costi di supporto preparatorio e coordinamento di un GAL dell'articolo 60 siano cofinanziate FEADER, non siano correlati all'attuazione di azioni. Oh, okay. I remember. This is the question whether it would be 8 or non-8. You know, 8. The question of 8 or non-8 is a difficult one, and it's never given en bloc. It's always the question or question of assessment of the very specific elements of the case. You may have 2 cases with the slightest difference, and one of them would constitute A and the other one would not. The mere fact that it's co-financed by the EF under the CAP e non siano correlati all'attuazione di azioni, I don't know what it can be. But I can never give you such a general answer that this would not be 8. Generally, state aid is objective concept. Conditions are in Article 107 1 of the treaty, and they are cumulative. So if we don't have one of these conditions, there is no state aid. It can be, maybe here what you mean is that there is no real advantage for the beneficiary. And yes, if it is proven that there is no advantage, then it would not be the aid. But we always have to assess these cumulative conditions in each and every case, and then we see if the state aid is present or not. But it's not. From my case practice, I can tell you that it's sometimes for many types of aid simpler to approve aid as compatible than to prove that there is no aid. But that doesn't mean that this is the case. I'm just saying that presence of aid or not depends on the very detailed element of the case. And we, in that case, we have to prove that one of the conditions or more conditions of Article 107.1 of the treaty is not fulfilled. So I cannot give you the answer on this. Generally, there is 8. But it can be that in a specific case, one element is not fulfilled.
Well,
Okay.
I know that this was a difficult question. Anyway, I tried. Do you think that it's better to present a state aid clearance for this case? Just to clarify this specific situation, or
you would have no clarification, because basically you refer to regulation, block exemption regulation, so you wouldn't get the ex-ante assessment.
okay.
You see, Article 108.3 of the treaty only obliges member states to inform the Commission of the measures which constitute state aid. So it is partially the responsibility of the member state to judge. If you as a member state you think that, oh, but this measure does not constitute aid, it is your responsibility. The decision whether you notify it to the Commission or not, it's entirely up to your discretion. If you notify, you can always notify. You know that the general notification form has, you can tick the box that it's notified for the reason of legal certainty. So it is, and then we, as the Commission, may agree or not. It's really the question of the assessment. But it is up to you to judge. You are the first judge of this aspect, whether you consider that it's aid or not. But here, as I said at the beginning, because you refer to the block exemption regulation, you anyway would not get the legal certainty sought, because we do not give ex ante assessment of the block exempted cases anymore. Generally, I think it's always better to notify. But the reality is that if you do not notify, the Commission would become aware of the measure which was not notified only via a complaint or market information. So if there is unhappy competitor, then yes, we would become aware of that, and then we would judge whether we want to start some procedure or not.
Yes, but we use the de minimis. It's just a question to understand. If we have the possibility to clarify the situation for the legs, not for an administrative problem. Okay, we have no.
I cannot hear. Can you hear me? Because I've lost the sound.
Excuse me, I don't understand why. But anyway, it's just we have we don't have an administrative problem, because we now use de minimis for this case, but because of the dimension of the leg. Okay, but we need to clarify we need to clarify the situation. Okay, but thank you. It's
generally if you hesitate. Generally, if you hesitate, it's better to to block exempt it, or use the minimis.
Okay.
That's perfectly fine. Okay, here I answered the questions which I received before. You said there were questions in the chat. See. Well, I see many complaints about the sound. The questions. I'm scrolling through the chat to see if I find the questions.
Mi sentite? Volevo ricordare a tutti, alla dottoressa Blehova in particolare, che in chat ci sono alcune domande che hanno posto i partecipanti. Vedo delle domande del dottor Micelli, dottor Mazzeo, dottoressa Trudu, ce ne sono altre, quindi chiedo cortesemente agli interpreti se possono tradurle e in modo che la dottoressa possa rispondere. Grazie.
Okay, I think I found something here, una con riferimento agli aiuti a favore delle zone rurali. I will read them in Italian as long as I understand. If not, then I will ask for the translation. Cofinanziati da FEASRD, i nuovi orientamenti non riportano le soglie di notifica e le percentuali di intensità. That is because we accept whatever is approved under the strategic plan. So it is for us, whatever is approved is fine as the intensity. That is the part of the simplified assessment. I think in the past you may have encountered the situation that we had, I think, different aid intensity under leader, lower than the RD, the strategy, the rural development program it was, and it caused a lot of problems. Under this simplified method which we apply now, this compatibility presumption clause, exactly this is the idea, to avoid any discrepancies. So no percentage, no aid intensity. What you have approved under the strategic plan will be approved under the stated rules. Come ci si accredita la piattaforma Wiki, dalla quale that is yes, we it is for sure central government that has access to that eWiki. It is a bit for the member state to arrange the who or at what level there will be access to eWiki. So basically, generally, eWiki is accessible to member states, but at what level it is for the member state to decide. So I think the best for you would be I cannot give you access if the central government doesn't give you access. So I think it's the Ministry of Agriculture, the Central Ministry of Agriculture in Roma that has access. They have the right to introduce questions. And I think you should approach them with the request. It can be different level of access. Maybe at the regional level, you would not have the right to introduce questions, but at least you can serve and read the questions that are already answered there, because there is a lot of very useful questions, and the whole purpose is that the questions tend to repeat. So instead of answering 100 times the same question, the member states can basically surf through this Wikipedia and find the answers. But the only thing I cannot give you access. It's a central government that can decide at what level access will be granted. I think it would be very useful for the regions to be able to at least make search there, but please approach the ministry. Ok, domanda. Progetti CLLD che rispettano le condizioni e le caratteristiche di qui all'articolo 6061. Possibile fare una comunicazione di esenzione unica per tutti i progetti di tutti i GAL? Yes, I think you can. You have the measure. You don't have to submit information sheet per project. But if you decide, let's say we are in Article 60, and if you decide that by this block exemption you only want to cover projects in which municipalities do not participate, then you have to have the eligible cost, meaning you can only cover those projects which are covered by the information sheet. So you can, in principle, It's just that your information sheet must be broad enough to cover all sorts of projects which you wish to include in the 8th measure. So it may also be, I understand, a bit complicated if there are municipalities, because for them the eligible costs are a bit more restricted, but generally yes. Tutte le misure elencate alla parte 3 degli orientamenti ed ex misure 1, 2, 7. La parte 3 come deve essere interpretata? Se gli interventi sono nel PSP, programma what is PSP? Is it piano strategico?
Sì.
Sono considerati corretti?
Sì, piano strategico.
Ok, yes. Yes, gli interventi nel PSP sono considerati corretti, yes, and serve notifica, yes, or you can have the block exemption, as I explained before, if la misura di piano strategico è identica to the given article of the block exemption regulation. But yes, it is the under the treaty, legislator, in this case Council and the Parliament, can only decide about the application of stated rules for measures which fall under Article 42. And because the rural areas and forestry do not, for that you, Member State, you will always need the approval under the stated rules. In materie fuori allegato articolo 42, se forestali potrebbe essere esentati ai sensi dell'articolo 48 del regolamento AB, se diverse dalle forestali ai sensi del 92 del regolamento 651, which is the, yes, in principle, but let me open Article 48. Yes, that's exactly, you understood correctly. If it is forestry advisory services in favor of forestry sector, which do correspond to what we have in Article 48, yes, block exempt by all means under ABER. If it is not covered by this, then you would use the general block exemption regulation. Yes.
Articolo 28, dottoressa, può essere giusto, esatto?
I honestly have to look for that. I don't know that well the general block exemption regulation. Would you like me to have a look? I can have a look, but I cannot answer. I have to find it. I have to look for it if you want me to. So if you give me a second, I think you may have a look at the training aid. There is Article 31, which basically, I think it's more general. It covers some advisory services linked to training aid, and maybe that would be better fit for you. I'm not prescriptive here, but 28 is very much linked to innovation. So basically, it's very different from the advisory services as we see them in Article 48 of the block exemption regulation. So please, I invite you to have a look at this training aid in the GBER. Maybe you would find it better fit for you. I think I would look at that. Any other questions? You can always, if you think of the questions, you can always, I wish to say you can introduce them via EVK, but as I said, I really don't know what is the level of the access for the regions in Italy. I think, I don't know, Silvia, did we ever provided you this address with EVK, the external address?
No.
What I would advise you, because it's very hard, okay, it's very hard for us to communicate outside the central government. So what I would advise you, you are the region, so you are public bodies, you can always act via central government or, you know, send us the question how to access it, and then we can, I mean, I hate to limit myself always to the same answer, that it is for Italy to decide, but it is really not for me to give you the access. So EVK is a very useful tool. You can always introduce the questions via EVK, and then you would have the answer, which is not my answer. as Lenka Blehova, because if I'm giving you here the answers, but this is the answer of me as a person working for the Commission. If you have the answer in eWiki, then it's still not the formal position of the Commission, but at least it's something that is agreed across the state aid part of DG competition. So it still has, I would say, more value in terms of certainty. So I very much encourage, we always very much encourage member states to use the tool. And if you are interested, please contact the central government with the possibility of access.
Finisce qua allora l'intervento della dottoressa Blehova, che ringraziamo per la sua disponibilità, per la sua pazienza, e faremo tesoro delle sue informazioni che ci ha dato e che le regioni cercheranno sicuramente di mettere in pratica. C'è il dottor Mirra, forse, che vuole dire qualcosa?
Sì, ecco, semplicemente relativamente alla difficoltà da parte nostra, io lavoro qui al Ministero, di ottenere l'accesso alla piattaforma perché è gestito appunto a livello centrale, ma non a livello ministeriale. Io adesso ho cercato di fare da tramite con il DPE, con la Presidenza del Consiglio, per sapere come ci si debba comportare, perché ecco, non so se la dottoressa Blehova sa, originariamente l'agricoltura da questa piattaforma non partecipava, cioè noi facevamo direttamente i quesiti e ci avvalevamo insomma dei funzionari della Commissione fino a che era permesso, cioè, in particolar modo col dottor Hendrix, prima con Chiara Micheli, insomma con tutte quante le varie funzionari della Commissione c'era un rapporto informale, diciamo, attraverso via mail. Questa piattaforma di wiki c'è stata preannunciata verso la fine dell'anno dicendo: guardate, anche l'agricoltura sarà abilitata a questa piattaforma, ma nessuno ci ha mai spiegato quello che dovete fare. Io sinceramente, infatti, si rivolgono a noi del Ministero, le regioni, e io penso che l'unica via, perché adesso ho avuto la certezza che in un primo tempo pensavamo che dipendesse dalla Commissione Europea, invece ci dite che dobbiamo fare un passaggio presumibilmente col governo centrale che poi darà l'autorizzazione a noi e poi in subordine anche alle regioni. Comunque vabbè, da quello che ho capito è una questione interna, quindi cercheremo di risolverla a livello nazionale. Grazie.
Yes, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that. It is certainly central government, maybe other ministry and if I gave wrong information, it wasn't, I mean, apologies for that, it's just a lack of knowledge. It is true that before agriculture was not participating because you may know that the agriculture was not part of the competition DG, but of agriculture. Here is the questions of pros and cons were to be. So we were not really allowed to participate there. We do now, and our instruments are there. So basically, it's fully open to agricultural questions as well. I think there is in the Commission a coordinator for Italy in our DG, and it is for some countries, it is Ministero dell'Economia, I think it's called, or Finance, that is a central body for access to eWiki. Maybe that is the ministry also in Italy. But it is for sure that Italy has access because we do have questions from Italy. It is correct that before we were participating in eWiki, we try to always answer the questions by email. The advantage of Wiki is that once the question is published there, all member states can see the answer. And as I said, it's also based on the broader agreement, not only the interpretation of one person or two persons. Mr. Hendricks, good for him, he just retired as from the 1st of June. So we have new Italian colleagues, but we generally, the eWiki was created for the purpose. We think it's very useful tool and source of information. So I hope you will find access so that you can really make full use of it.
Grazie.
Scusi, posso intervenire, ma diciamo per quanto riguarda la possibilità, il discorso dell'accesso, però immagino che i quesiti agricoli siano stati posti da pochissimo tempo, cioè per quanto riguarda, perché l'agricoltura è fuori dal common understanding, quindi noi all'inizio non neanche partecipavamo. Io credo che all'interno della piattaforma al momento siano presenti quasi esclusivamente quesiti posti in ambito di normativa aiuti extragricola. Se mi può correggere, cioè mi può confermare che la posizione dei quesiti agricoli è iniziata semplicemente con l'inizio della nuova programmazione, quindi dal 1° gennaio 2023?
Depends on how specific the question is. There are many questions, which are cross-cutting. Now if you ask a specific question about agriculture era XYZ, then yes, this would be there only if the question was asked since we participate. But there are many questions which we received from agricultural ministries or from agricultural sector, which concern, I don't know, definition of the small and medium-sized enterprise, for example, because the definition applies to all sectors of economy. And there are many answers on every aspect of this definition, because you know that this definition applies, it's part of the block exemption regulation, but it's part also of the general block exemption regulation. So basically it's been answered. Every aspect probably has several answers. So it, like I said, depends on how specific the question is on agriculture. I'm sure that because we use it very broadly when we receive the question on many aspects. It's if not answered yet, at least we find very many pertinent elements which already can give you an indication of the answer. So it's not the waste of time to make search there, even though some very specific questions indeed might be there only as from the 1st of January.
Ecco, un'ultima domanda, per quanto riguarda il discorso della fine dei controlli sull'Aber, no? Adesso diciamo da circa un anno è terminato il controllo preliminare a cui si è fatto riferimento all'inizio della presentazione. Ecco, vorrei sapere in che cosa consiste la procedura che farà poi la Commissione nel momento in cui sarà pubblicato il regolamento. In cosa consistono esattamente i controlli ex post e successivamente, ecco, qualora si dovessero verificare delle difficoltà sul regime attivato dallo Stato membro, diciamo, quali opzioni ci sono per sanare la situazione, fare una notifica successiva? Ecco, è quello, perché vorremmo sapere tutti quanti in cosa consistono i controlli e poi eventualmente come è sanabile la situazione per un difetto nella comunicazione in esenzione.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ex post checks. Ex post checks have been there even before. It is true that it's not us who makes the selection of the cases which will be subject to ex post check. It's a central selection system which takes, which sets out certain criteria. It might be very high budget. It might be doubts on beneficiaries. It might be a novel, like an innovation in the aid scheme. It can be really different conditions which a specific unit basically selects, and then they only attribute it to the unit that was responsible for the original scheme. There is a checklist for the ex post check. There is a checklist, a template which we send to the member state to fill. So it really covers. It's quite detailed from what I've did in the past. It's quite detailed. So it asks the member state questions to answer about the implementation of the measure. If we find discrepancies, there are not several, basically two possibilities. If it is something that we consider that is can be remedied for the future, we ask member state to remedy it for the future. Example, I remember, you know that for the large undertakings, application, the aid application must be accompanied by the counterfactual scenario. And that counterfactual scenario must be supported by the documents. In the past, I remember a member state did not have this condition of the supporting document. So basically, a large undertaking submitted aid application, submitted counterfactual scenario, but did not submit the supporting document. This was exactly the error which we considered that does not really merit to open the formal investigation, and we simply requested that the member state makes changes in the legal basis for the future. Now, when there is an error which we consider that makes aid absolutely incompatible, then we normally should proceed with a formal investigation. The procedural regulation fully applies, and the Commission should open a formal investigation. And if there are doubts, basically, because the formal investigation is triggered by the doubt on the incompatibility. And if that doubt is confirmed, then the recovery of such incompatible aid should follow. So it can be as bad as that. Yes.
Benissimo, molto, molto gentile, perché sappiamo che lei è molto impegnata e di conseguenza ci sono altre priorità. Comunque molto disponibile e professionale come sempre la dottoressa Blehova, che noi ringraziamo. Penso di interpretare il pensiero dei funzionari regionali, della Regione Campania innanzitutto, che hanno organizzato questo incontro, e sicuramente di tutti gli altri partecipanti al seminario. Ringrazio tutti voi, e vista la disponibilità della dottoressa Blehova, se qualcuno ha qualche domanda da mandarle privatamente lo può fare.